Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today we're jumping into your favorite, ProRevenge. Before we start, if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It's completely free and the knowledge you'll gain here might help you deal with a Karen in the future. Alright, our first story today comes to us from Revolutionary Ant 209. My 8.5 pound revenge on my cheating, thieving ex. Let's jump right in. When I was at uni, I started dating this guy. At first, he was wonderful, dedicated to his studies, fun to be around, attentive, and always surprising me with things, working hard at his job, etc. Then, bit by bit, things unraveled. He started skipping classes. Then, he barely bothered to go at all. Worse still, he never helped around the house, never washed up, cleaned up, did laundry, nothing. He was even fired from his job for too many no-shows. All he wanted to do was sit at home and play Xbox or browse the message boards and forums. This was in the days before social media, when dinosaurs roamed the earth. This left me having to pick up extra shifts, sometimes double and triple shifts, all while going to class and studying. I later learned that this was a pattern for him. He'd be really dedicated to whatever he set his heart on, but then get bored and fall back into old habits. Then he'd find a new passion and rinse and repeat. I knew I should have ended the relationship much sooner, but I held out hope that he would snap out of it, that maybe it was just exam stress getting to him. I desperately wanted things to go back to how they were, but it was not meant to be. I caught him cheating and threw him out. I was so stressed with everything that it wasn't until the next day that our joint savings account crossed my mind. There was a little over £5,000 in there, and bar a few hundred from him, the rest was money I had saved. I checked the account and it was all gone. My ex had cleaned out the account and moved into a new flat with his side chick. I called the bank, there was nothing they could do. He was authorized on the account. I contacted the police, they told me there was nothing they could do since it was a joint account, so nothing criminal had happened. They suggested taking it to civil court, but said I'd probably spend more money than I'd get back in legal fees, so it likely wasn't worth it. My ex had stolen £5,000, and there was nothing I could do about it. I felt like such an idiot. I got even angrier when I saw his posts on various forums boasting about his new game consoles, new games, new TVs and gadgets, all bought with my money. I'm not usually a vengeful person. Petty on occasion, sure, but I've never wanted to exact revenge as much as I did right then. And I knew just how to do it. While I was a student, I temped every summer to help pay for my studies. One such job had been for a debt collection agency. The work was crappy as you can imagine, but it paid really well, and it was only for a few months. My ex had been dodging debt for many years, and he was very proud of that fact. He was also proud of the fact that his debt was close to being statute barred, and he hadn't paid a penny. For those of you who don't know, in the UK, creditors have about 6 years to collect a debt, and then it becomes statute barred. That means the money is still owed, but creditors have no legal way to enforce payment, such as using bailiffs. My ex was a few months away from reaching statute barred status. However, what a lot of people don't know is that making a payment on that debt resets the clock. If you pay any amount, then that 6 years starts from scratch. Previously, I had used my insider knowledge to help him dodge the debt. Now, I would use it to hit him where it hurt. By the end of our relationship, I was handling everything, including his debts. I had the paperwork, so I knew who he owed and how much. I called his creditors up. I was honest and said I was a friend calling to make a payment on his behalf. I didn't pretend to be him because that would be a big legal no-no. They weren't allowed to disclose any details, but they were able to take payment. I paid the minimum I could on each debt, about £1 on most, but one had a minimum payment of £1.50. It was the best £8.50 I have ever spent. I also made sure to give them his new address and contact details, as well as his parents' address. Having worked in the biz, I knew they wouldn't change the address since I wasn't the account holder, but they would note it. They had various systems where they could search for his name against that address and see if anything came up. If they got a hit, they'd change the address. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait. A few months rolled by, then it happened. His posts on the forums went from boasting about his new gaming PC to panic about a court date. He called me and begged for advice. I told him to F off. Seeing I wouldn't help, he asked for advice in the forums. One of his online friends told him not to turn up to court. That way, they wouldn't be able to prosecute without him there. It was terrible advice that was 100% untrue. In fact, not showing up is one of the worst things you can do, especially in civil court. This was getting better and better. The court date came and went. My ex naturally didn't go. A few weeks later, my ex posted photos of his empty flat. Bailiffs had cleaned him out and taken every last one of his shiny new gadgets and toys. On top of that, he ended up with several CCJs, county court judgments. These are a big deal and can seriously damage your credit history, making it hard to get bank accounts outside of basic ones, near impossible to get credit, including getting a mortgage, and it can also make it hard to rent a place since many landlords don't like renting to people with CCJs as they're considered high risk. He also won't be able to find jobs in the financial sector. Now that he was broke and didn't have nice things, his side chick left him. I never got my £5,000 back, but it felt good to see everything he bought with his ill-gotten gains taken away. I hope that £5,000 was worth it. For anyone wondering how a student accrued 6 years of debt, he started at the university I attended when he was 25. He had initially gone to a different university at 18, but dropped out at 19 and went into the world of work. Then, he convinced his parents to fund a business degree. He wanted to become an entrepreneur. And for anyone worried about the age gap, I deferred my uni start date by a few years so I could travel. I was 22 when we started dating, he was 26. Wow, this is like the poster story for not having joint accounts until you're married, and even then, still having your own accounts as well, just in case. This was mentioned to OP down in the comments by a user called Zorab1. They said, "You learned a lesson too. No joint account unless married. It is too easy to cut and run otherwise and nothing can be done. This won't stop an account from being cleaned out, but can be brought up in divorce proceedings." OP responded to this one and said, "Yes, it was a very hard but important lesson. I just wish it hadn't cost me £5,000. It was my own stupid fault. I took that lesson to heart." Well, you know, OP, I think we're all entitled to one major mistake, and this was yours, but now you know how to handle an early relationship going forward. Never have a joint account. I can't say that enough. Never have a joint account, because unless you're married and you've been married for 10-15 years, you don't know where that's going. And honestly, in some relationships after 10-15 years, you still don't know where that's going. This next story comes to us from ashleyorelse. Make a developmentally disabled boy cry? Lose your family. Let's jump right in. My former boss is the worst human being I've ever met. He did all sorts of things to mess with anyone he didn't like. So a while ago, I was at a family event in a local park walking with a young boy from our family who is developmentally disabled with Down syndrome, Ben. Ben does fairly well, all things considered, but he's always been sensitive to anyone making fun of the way he looks or his condition. We're just having a good time on our little stroll, Ben and I both enjoying the day. Along comes my boss walking towards us. I'll call him Rob. I cringe at seeing him but smile and say hello to play nice. There's something you don't see every day, a pair of ugly retards walking together. Ben bursts into tears and Rob laughs and walks off. I deal with Ben and ignore Rob. I'm super pissed and trying to calm Ben down because for a few minutes he was totally distraught. Finally, I get Ben to focus on how he has me and a lot of other awesome friends and family, and that Rob is a stranger and what he thinks doesn't matter. We walked some more and I saw that Rob was at the park with his wife and teen daughter, having a cookout, and he apparently had been on his way back to his family from a trip to the toilet when he saw us. Back to being super pissed, I went back to our gathering and talked to an adult cousin of mine, Jake, telling him what happened. Jake wanted to get revenge on Rob, but I reminded him that this was my boss. I didn't want Rob to be able to know the revenge had anything to do with me, because then he'd make my work life even worse than he already had. So Jake asked me for anything I knew about Rob that might help. I told Jake a bunch of things about Rob, but the relevant info here is that Rob liked to drink a particular kind of locally made beer at a certain bar. Rob had talked of having a drink there on the previous Friday night while his wife and daughter were away visiting her family. Also, Rob had recently told a story at work about his wife's obsession with a particular little green fictional character. Let's call it Yaby Boda. Turns out, his wife kept a stuffed Yaby Boda on their bed at all times. I wasn't there for the revenge setup itself because I didn't want Rob to see me, but Jake filled in the details afterwards. It was basically this. Jake approached Rob and put an arm around his shoulders and tried to kiss him. Rob pushes him off. "What are you doing?" Rob's family is now paying attention. "I'm just so excited to see you, sweetie. Friday night was so amazing." "What are you talking about?" "Seriously? You're gonna act like you don't remember now? I know you were a bit tipsy after all of those specific local beers at the local bar. But certainly you remember what happened later." "Nothing happened later, or ever. I don't even know your name." "Really? You were screaming it on Friday." Rob's turning red. "You lying son of a..." Rob's wife interrupted. "Listen, I don't know who you are, but this is my husband. I'm sure you have him mistaken for someone else. Please just leave us alone." "Oh, no, I'm not mistaken. We had the best adult relations ever on Friday night, and now he's acting like he doesn't even know me." "I told you, this is my husband. You're mistaken." "Oh, maybe I am. I guess it was someone else who took me back to his place on Rob Street and had great adult relations with me on the bed right next to Yaby Boda. Sorry." Jake turns and walks away. "Oh my god, Rob, what the F is wrong with you? You're gay now? Really?" Already long story made a bit shorter, Rob's wife wasn't real happy with him anyway, and this was apparently the tipping point that made her file for divorce soon thereafter. Rob frequently complained at work in the following months about how he didn't care about his wife, but really missed his daughter, and how much it sucked to live in his new place compared to his old home. Every time he complained about his lack of a home life at work, I knew he did it to himself when he was mean to a developmentally disabled kid. The best part is, he never figured out I was involved at all. Wow, if you have a boss that's willing to say things like that to you in public, report that to somebody higher up at the company, especially if it's a big chain, because that guy's not going to be working at that company very much longer. Add that to being divorced by his wife, and well, this whole thing just turned into nuclear revenge. Our next story today comes to us from this very long username right here. "Keeping me up at night with your parties? Enjoy being shamed on the national news." Let's jump right in. In September of 2020, the apartment next to mine was let out to two young women, both students. After they settled in a bit, it turned out they wanted to have a party. No big deal, except Belgium was in full lockdown at this point due to COVID, and you were supposed to only have one fixed visitor over. But then again, to be young again, etc., so I didn't really care. During this time, I was working in healthcare. I work with the mentally disabled, but I volunteered for the ad hoc COVID team, meaning I got called upon to tend to those residents who were sick and needed quarantining, or were effectively diagnosed with COVID. This meant pretty long working hours, and I spent about 10 to 11 hours a day at work, with a full hour bike ride to and from work. Needless to say, I was pretty tired pretty much all of the time, so I wasn't looking forward to the noise from a party, but I'm pretty chill and know that living in the city, some noise is to be expected. So they are having their party, and I can stand some noise and music, but this party was effing wild. People shouting full on in the hallway, wrecking things, etc., etc. At about 4 in the morning, I introduced myself to the neighbors and asked them when they could expect their company, 20 plus people, to leave, and if they could refrain from having a party the next day, as I have to work and get up at 6 every day. So they promised they would keep it down the rest of the night. They didn't, and that they wouldn't have a party the next day. Plot twist, they did have another party, and then did another one the day after. At this point, I had been going a full 3 nights without sleep and was nearing neurosis. Every night I had talked to the girls, and every night they would be full of apologies and stuff, but nothing would change. I also felt terrible when I had to enter their place, because it would be absolutely packed with people, and I work with some very vulnerable people at work who I wouldn't want to spread COVID to. This was pre-tests, pre-vaccines, pretty much of all the knowledge we have now about COVID. Luckily, the weekend came and they went to their parents and I could recover a bit. Suffice it to say, I wasn't really liking my new neighbors. During the next few weeks, they refrained from big parties, but they would have a constant flood of people coming over during the night. And by constant, I mean constant. Like their bell would ring 70 times a night and people would always be coming or going. And those people would be drunk and loud. Our communal hallway is pretty much an echo chamber because it's all stone and any noise would travel throughout the building. Basically, I couldn't rely to sleep at night. It drove me crazy. I could only sleep Friday through Sunday because then they would go off to their parents or whatever. I couldn't grasp how they could know this many people that would always be coming and going. During one night, while knocking on their door to complain about the noise, I encountered my upstairs neighbor, who is also on Reddit, hi, and decided that we would have to join forces to get this to stop. My neighbor told me some important bit of information. The reason there were people coming and going all the time was because they used their apartment as a makeshift bar and hangout. During this time, bars were closed due to COVID, and all those students were using the big apartment to hang out. Moreover, across the street was another frat house with 5 boys living there, and that too was a secret hangout. So people would hang out at those 2 places and cross the street if they wanted a different atmosphere, or wanted to see their other friends, etc, etc. And the boys from across the street would also come over 15 times a night. Most visitors seemed to be law students or affiliated with them. Basically, our communal hallway was just a part of their cafe space now. So we tried talking to the girls. Then we started to talk to the visitors. None of them had any sympathy for us when we were asking them to be quiet at 4 in the morning. Most of them just laughed at us, as we were the pesky neighbors, no doubt. Even more of them were just so wasted that they didn't know what they were doing. So we started calling the police dozens of times. Most of the times they weren't let in and police told us they couldn't do anything. We kept calling as we wanted a record of our calls in the system. Belgium was still in full lockdown at this point, and what they were doing was full-on illegal. Even so, police told us their hands were tied if they wouldn't open the door. When the police couldn't help, I turned to the next best thing. I am a social worker, and so I have no problems looking up information and calling around to look for help. This is what I did. Most places, student unions, police, town hall, were understanding but couldn't really do much. So I acted on the suggestion of the upstairs neighbor and contacted one of the girls' deans. I shot him a nice email about sorry to have bothered him and taking up his time. But I had this big group of students from his faculty ganging up every night, and maybe he wanted to know about it since they were breaking every possible COVID rule that existed at that time. Especially since me and my neighbor were about to go to the papers with this story, as secret lockdown parties were becoming a thing in the papers at this point. The dean called me back right away, and we had a nice talk about our problems. He told me he was on it. So basically what he did was call the law student girl and her parents. Big drama ensued, and we finally got to sit down with the girls and they finally sounded like they were sorry. Tears were shed, for which I had no patience, to be honest. We learned that the police had actually been inside a few times and they were issued tickets for having secret parties. Those were 300 euros each a pop, so no idea why they didn't just stop. We learned they were not happy because the dean had called them up at 11 o'clock and they were still asleep. To which I said, well, there is your problem. You are still asleep at 11 o'clock. I'm up at 6 every day, and you girls haven't been a bit understanding about that. So we got to feel a bit like we got our revenge and we got to vent. But we kept it kinda nice and parted in good terms, hoping that this would be it and we could live together as nice neighbors. But if that were the case, I wouldn't be here, right? You'd think they would have gotten the point now and would refrain from making noise and partying. Well, you'd be wrong. Basically what they did was they moved to the frat house across the street and started partying there. There were slightly less people running to and fro, but the noise was still a problem, and we were now in the middle of the second COVID wave, and these people were meeting up with big groups like crazy, while I hadn't seen a soul in almost a year. Never mind the people at my work who were forbidden from even going to their own friggin' families. The whole thing was just ridiculous. My upstairs neighbor happened to film such a party across the street and had sent the clip to me. We were thinking about going to the press with our story, but weren't really sure if it would be a good idea. So I posted the clip of the party on the subreddit of our country to test the waters. It got quite some comments and upvotes, and it seemed most people were also sick of people disregarding the rules and having secret parties. After some talks with the upstairs neighbor, we decided to contact the press and simultaneously go up a step in the university hierarchy and contact the vice rector that had the power to start up a disciplinary case against the students. This person is one of 12 vice rectors for a total campus of about 15,000 students, so quite high up. Things moved fast. Local news actually picked up our story from Reddit and contacted me, and we gave some background info. They confirmed with the police that cops had been dozens of times to our address and across the street and weren't let in most of the time. We mentioned that the university was involved and that we hoped they would finally intervene. The next day, the piece was on their website. It went viral there and got promoted to the sites of most national newspapers. Its headline was sensational enough, mentioning the dozens of times police had showed up and mentioning how healthcare workers were being kept up by selfish students. At the same time, the vice rector contacted us to take our statements, which we already had prepared up on paper, and informed us they would investigate and could possibly start up disciplinary actions. At the same time, more reporters were contacting me throughout the day, and we made sure to mention that to her and link the university the printed articles. The next day while at work, I got a message from the upstairs neighbor that a film crew from the national news was at our doorstep. He declined to talk to them, and I would have done the same since this was getting pretty big now, but they made a segment anyway. And sure enough, that night at 7, here was my street and a short section about cops standing in front of a closed door a dozen times, and the local press cop talking about the troubles of closed doors. Best part about it was that a student from the offending frat house across the street had let the film crew in and said on camera exactly what we were accusing them of towards the university, that they had been having parties and didn't let the cops in, and that they had done it multiple times. No idea what made him think that was a good idea. Anyway, trying not to make a huge story even longer, the press died down sometime later, thank goodness, and the disciplinary action from the university went through. Before the hearing, we sat down with the girls from our block and cleared some things up. We wanted to live like normal people together, and we tried to make some amends. Because we put in a kind of good word for them, they got the lighter end of the stick, 40 hours of community service and some probation. The guys across the street got 80 hours each, and each had to write us a letter of apology, which I thoroughly enjoyed reading every time I got one. Sad part is, most of them sounded like dumb young kids, but that was after getting called out on the news and being part of a disciplinary action. But we never wanted to escalate things this far. Some noise is to be expected when living in the same building, and we were never going to go to these extremes for some expected noises. But these people went to the extremes, and so we were forced to do the same. Rest of the year, a simple message on WhatsApp was enough to silence any noises we had coming from their apartment. If anything, I hope they learned that even very polite and chilled people can become very upset when presented with sleep deprivation and excessive noise. So down in the description of this video, there's a link to story number 3, which will take you right to the story I just read on Reddit. Now, on OP's profile, you can actually find a video they took of the people across the street, and let me tell you, they were definitely being extremely loud, and I personally wouldn't want to put up with that until 4 o'clock in the morning, or 6 o'clock in the morning, or however long it was that they were staying up. It's pretty bad. So I was thinking a little bit about this story and how they were given fines, but they kept on going anyway. And what I came up with is I think they were probably charging access to the apartment to the people who were coming in. Either that or they were on really nice allowances from mommy and daddy while they were at school and just never learned the value of money itself. I do kinda wish there were some charges that came about here because, let's be real, these were law students and they should be respecting the law. Check out all 3 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching, I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.